Hello everybody and welcome back to another installment from our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Today's guest, Jim Fava, dialed in all the way from Costa Rica and spoke about his 10 golden rules of LCA. Here's a sneak preview.
So people say that LCA is only a linear thing is wrong. Circular LCA is a circular tool and to deal with circular issues.
Let's start with the end. Let's start with what we actually want to do with LCA. We have to have the application and the users in mind before we actually start.
We found the goal and scope definition is really one of the most critical phases of an LCA. All products have some kind of impact, and there's no such thing as a green product, only greener products.
Labelled as the father of modern day life cycle assessment, Jim shared his expertise on the subject matter, and what I like most about this webinar is that he provided great examples of how global corporations have integrated LCA into their product and services lines. With that, let's get started.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today is all about the 10 golden rules of LCA. And why do we need the 10 golden rules of LCA? Pretty much because once upon a time, there was a tool. There was a tool called LCA. And that is how I will never want to start a presentation on LCA, because it's not there was a tool, it's very much alive and kicking. And that is thanks to Jim to a great extent. LCA is as much alive and kicking as it was 30 years ago when the actual term life cycle assessment was coined. And it's my great pleasure to have Jim here with me today. He's often called the father of modern LCA. He had numerous roles helping businesses develop LCA, implement LCA. He was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award for all his services to LCA. And it was no other than Jim who actually coined that term, life cycle assessment, 30 years ago. But for Jim, that was not job done, let's move on. While he claims he's doing retirement and training at the moment, I see him every other week on a conference call. So he really is working quite a lot and tirelessly on doing exactly that, keeping LCA alive, making it even more relevant, adding value on how can we do LCA better. A couple of years ago, he was here at our LCAs summit and he gave us a challenge. Do we need to rebrand LCA? I don't think anyone else other than who coined the term can ask us to rebrand LCA. It wasn't his first visit. He was here 2016, 2014, and I'll leave it to Jim to talk about his very first visit to New Zealand. He couldn't be here a couple of weeks ago when we had our LCAs summit, the Life Cycle Association New Zealand, but quite a few of the presenters actually referenced him. One said, we had a workshop with Jim and he came and talked to our senior leadership team, and that is when it clicked for them to really connect to the business value of LCA. So even you weren't here last time, you were well remembered. And we don't have a gap on the slide, but we've got a plan. Looking forward to having you here very soon. While we are waiting for that to happen, we're working on a few projects with Jim and a big international LCA community on increasing the value of LCA, or a rapid pride, too long a title, and I'll come to that. It's all about making it more relevant, not changing methodology, where Jim would actually argue, I think, it shouldn't be interpretation, but improvement. But otherwise, that is the model that was in that LCA standard that he helped writing. And he's not worried about taking this now and flipping it completely on its head. Let's start with the end. Let's start with what we actually want to do with LCA. We have to have the application and the users in mind before we actually start. So we've changed the title of this really long project title to just Let's Get LCA Unstuck. And that is what Jim's 10 golden rules do. So with that, Jim, over to you, and looking forward to see how we can get LCA unstuck.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Good afternoon. It's a good evening on Wednesday night here in Costa Rica. but I'm pleased to be back in New Zealand, at least virtually. And Barb's comment about a long time ago, probably before many of you were even born, I spent 2 weeks in Wellington. I was on an oceanographic research vessel. We went around the world and we had engine trouble, and we stayed 2 weeks in Wellington, and I got to know the people, the culture, and I remember there's a big voting going on about closing the pubs at 6 o'clock at night or something like that, and that was a lot of havoc being raised because the pubs were supposed to be closed. But I'm glad to be back. And one of the things that I wanted to really share with everybody this afternoon is that a little bit of the sort of the context of what we've learned over the last 30 years, and then try to lay out from that learning these 10 golden rules. And there's 3 or 4 of them that I think are higher priority, and so I'm going to spend more time on them, but we'll cover all 10. But to do that, and for to really do that, I really want to talk about a couple of examples that illustrate where LCA came from and why it's evolved to where it is today. So one of the things that were happening in the late 80s and early 90s was this focus on manufacturing solid waste and in the US terminology, Superfund legislation of these hazardous waste sites, and that people were cleaning it up. And we were talking about pollution prevention. And then we got into concern about products, but more from a chemical safety. Is it safe for humans or safe for the environment? And then there were 2 studies that really changed sort of the dynamics of why and how we were looking at products. One was this diaper, I call it dueling diaper debate, and the other one was Coca-Cola. And the dueling diaper debate was one, this was the barge that you see on the right-hand side, was going up and down the east coast of the US looking for, it contained solid waste, looking for a landfill to place it, and there was no landfills available. The cloth diaper industry at that point said, well, we are really better for the environment because there was this fledgling single-use diaper that was beginning to be on the market, and because we don't create solid waste. And so cloth diapers are good because we don't have solid waste. When you looked only at one site, one life cycle stage, and one impact. And then the companies that sort of manufacture the disposable diaper, single-use diaper, basically said, let's do a life cycle assessment. And they did a life cycle assessment that showed, well, if you look at the full life cycle, and with cloth, you got to pick the diaper up, you got to take it to a cleaning area, you got to heat the water to wash the diapers, you got detergents, you got water, you got all these multiple impacts that are going to occur when you look at a cloth diaper versus a single-use diaper. So single-use diaper maybe was more problematic on the solid waste, but then cloth diaper were problematic overall. And the lesson learned to me when all that was happening was that what we needed to focus in on products was not just product safety or chemical safety, but really focus on the entire life cycle from raw materials acquisition through end of life, and look at multiple impacts. So that was sort of an earlier study that brought that more holistic life cycle systematic perspective. But because we had been spending a lot of time on solid waste and manufacturing sites where the environmental issues were really focused on, what we did because of the changes, because of this dueling diaper study, showed that we really have to look at the entire value chain from cradle, to grave. And so that's where the terminology cradle to grave, came about. But because we're not just looking at the end of life or manufacturing, but we're looking at the entire value chains. The cradle to grave came because we were thinking about it from that context. The second study is the Coca-Cola study. This was earlier time frame, but what Coca-Cola did was that they were looking at all the different materials that were used for the beverage container. And they basically challenged, the aluminum, the steel, the plastic and glass, saying all of you have impacts to the environment. But go back, instead of we're going to pick one and deselect the other, we're going to say all of you go back. You all have impacts on the environment. and then go back and make changes to see what you can do to improve your life cycle footprint. And aluminum industry basically came back and really helped develop the whole infrastructure for recycling, because what they were able to do is take the used beverage container back and make new beverage containers. And by doing that, they reduced the energy consumption by 90%. And two valuable outputs of that. One was that it created a major market opportunity, and then Coca-Cola was using more and more of the aluminum, partially because it would reduce the global, the greenhouse gas and energy by 90%. The other thing happened was that it helped create and fund the recycling infrastructure, because now you had aluminum that was really, people were willing to pay for and came about. But that study, even though it was earlier, you put the two contexts. The Diaper study really looked at things from a cradle to grave, entire systems life cycle. The Coca-Cola study illustrates that we were early on in the life cycle thinking circularity. We weren't just thinking linear, even though we were calling it cradle to grave, we were thinking circularity. And so people say that LCA is only a linear thing, is wrong. LCA is a circular tool and to deal with circular issues. So that was sort of the earlier element of this. And so I want to talk just a couple of examples. This is one that was done by a shoe company in the sort of the mid-Atlantic area where I was living at the time. And they sourced their leather from the US. They shipped it over to Europe and Portugal, and they made the shoe in Portugal, and then shipped it back to the US for selling. And 8,000 miles, and they, all the greenhouse gases associated with the transportation. So the CEO came to us and said, we want to move the plant back, manufacturing from Portugal back to the US. And we said, well, let's look at it from a life cycle perspective. And what came out of that was that the largest greenhouse gas emissions was really on the upstream contribution of the leather production, not on transportation. So by looking at it strategically, she said, oh, okay, now we're going to put our emphasis and effort in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the leather production. And we can still have the plant in Portugal, and this transportation, although meaningful, wasn't the most significant. So it was an early hotspot analysis that really created a strategic decision, for the CEO. And now they put a lot of research and effort into the leather production and how to manage and reduce that. The second example is Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson, big consumer package company, also a big in the healthcare and pharma area, three major sectors they're in. But they developed an earthworks project and approach. And it was something that we had helped them with over 10 years ago now. And it really was a way of incorporating life cycle information into their stage gate innovation process. And there's 4 steps associated with it. And there's a lot of papers and published on it and a lot of good information. But what they did was use that earthworks process to really create products that earned the earthworks recognition, ones that were better for the environment for various categories. And the good part of this example of Johnson & Johnson, 2 things surfaced. One was they created positive sustainability impacts by reducing energy or water, some of the things that they looked at. And they really created a situation where $8 billion in revenue was generated from that. So by using this earthworks process and the recognition system, they created both business value and positive sustainability impacts. And it's just, to me, is a perfect example of where we're trying to drive LCA, not just to the study results, but how to use that to drive business value and sustainability impacts. The third example I want to talk to is BSF. BSF has had an eco-efficiency tool for 20-some years ago. We helped them early on. The eco-efficiency has both a LCA and a total cost of ownership component. We helped them sort of think about and come up with some examples of the total cost of ownership, and that's been a foundational tool for them. But they've used the eco-efficiency tool to really identify a number of products and improvement, and they now communicate that, through a CO2 footprint, where they've calculated the CO2 footprint for like 45,000 of their products. So very active in incorporating life cycle information into their innovation process. The other thing they've done on the right over here, they have a portfolio sustainability assessment. What that is a way they can characterize all 45,000 products into what I call the Clint Eastwood, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then they take the accelerator ones and they set a goal by 2025. They want $22 billion, or euros in this case, to fall within the accelerator. So they put extra investment into that, and they really can communicate to their customers. And over on the right-hand side, they have the ones that fall into the challenge category are ones they look at. They either decide how to get rid of or to improve. So I think another example, BSF is just a great example where they've taken life cycle information and embedded it into their core business practices. So from that, we really came up with 10 golden rules, and I want to sort of walk through each of one of those, and I'll try to bring back these examples to make them relevant to each of the rules. So the first golden rule is there is no green products, only greener or more sustainable products. Al Iannuzzi used to be a senior director of sustainability at Johnson & Johnson. Now he's vice president of sustainability at Estee Lauder. But he's written a couple books, and we had a privilege of writing a chapter in each of his books. But his whole perspective is that every product can be improved in some way, and that's why he uses the term greener. Because what happens is that all products have some kind of an impact. And I think we've seen that, when you look at the work we had, with the cloth diaper, and the disposable diaper, each had impacts. Then you have to look at the trade-offs associated with it. But I do think the golden rules is all products have some kind of impact, and there's no such thing as a green product, only greener products. The second golden rule is LCA provides understanding of the impacts over the entire life cycle. And for all of us in the life cycle community, we know this. It's something that we've been working on and we understand. But this diagram is not a cradle to grave linear perspective. It's a very circularity perspective. And when you think about how do you manage products over the entire life cycle or packaging over the entire life cycle, you really have to understand those full impacts at each of those life cycle stages and identify the hotspots, and then look at ways to improve or reduce the impacts, or create business value. So this one I think is key, but it's a systematic perspective, and LCA has impacts over the entire value chain. The third one, life cycle information is essential but not sufficient. This was some work that we had done with, this is the Home Appliance Association in the US, but they wanted to come up with criteria and standards for greener appliances. So we did LCA work, but in addition to the LCA, which helped us hotspot analysis, they needed to have scientific studies on what are the materials of concern, what are the existing standards, stakeholder concerns. And coming out of this effort, which was really a multi-stakeholder effort, where you ended up getting LCA information was essential, but you needed additional information to come up with ultimately a standard that you could say meets certain criteria, sort of a gold, bronze, silver kind of a, categories. So this was something that we've seen, and we're all already now working on when you look at packaging, should I look at plastic versus paper in a bag or something like that? And so LCA provides some information, but things like recyclability of the plastic and the paper is really not done 100% with an LCA. You need complementary information. So LCA information is essential but not sufficient. The fourth golden rule, speak the language of your audience. This is the one that when we were in New Zealand, I think the first time in 2014, we had a workshop, a 4-hour workshop, and we ended up talking about each of these 4 business values: growing revenue, enhancing your brand, reducing your cost, and mitigating risk. And we had a 4-hour workshop going through each of the 4 boxes and going through examples of each of those, the bullets. And at the start of the workshop, I asked the 40 people and the attendees, I said, think about a project that if you wanted to get funded and you tried to get funded, but you were turned down, it was not funded. So think about that. At the end of the 4 hours, I said, if you use the language that we learned over the last 4 hours to pitch that project, you think you'd be funded. And all 40 people raised their hand. And so part of this, you need to learn how to speak, the audience, the language of the audience. And another example that came out of this, I think was interesting. We had some projects with a major manufacturer in Connecticut, and we're meeting with the environment, health, and safety folks. And all they talked about, all the thing the company is interested in is cost reduction. If you can't show how I can reduce cost, then we're not going to be interested. And then somewhere halfway through the meeting, the vice president of innovation showed up in the meeting. And we were talking about this, and he said, yeah, cost reduction is important. But for me, in my role, I look at innovation, and if I can do some innovation that grows revenue, that's going to be more important. So that was just a simple little couple-hour conversation. A whole part of the company was interested in cost. Another whole part of the company, which is often the innovation group, is interested in revenue. You have to manage costs. It's not unlimited budgets, but different people in the company are going to have different perspectives. So part of the language of making LCA results more relevant and useful and understandable is start being able to translate the results into how you can grow revenue, enhance brand, reduce cost, and mitigate risk. The 5th golden rule, this is one from a sort of the Alice in Wonderland sort of days, is if you don't know your destination, any tool will get you there. And I think the problem with the tool is that if you don't know where you want to be and where you want to go, then it's just one tool in your toolbox. And this is why we found the goal and scope definition is really one of the most critical phases of an LCA. And you want to be able to bring in that goal and scope the users of that information, and then understand their language. Because if you don't know where they want to be and where they want to go, then the LCA tool may work or may not work. And so it's critical. If you don't know where you're going, any tool will get you there. So you have to know where you're going. The 6th one is, without a seat, 3 legs of a stool are useless. And this is one that we found the governance. You look at ESG and the investor community, environmental, social, and governance is sort of the ESG is a terminology that's gaining a lot of prominence now, particularly with the investors and some of the governments. But if you have social, environmental, and economic performance, which you have, but you don't have a governance within which those performance can be managed, you have business practices, whether it's strategy or business development or business models or innovation. Without that governance, policies and procedures and rules, this may just go away by having anybody who's strong and able to take sort of leadership to drive it. But if that person leaves, then it may go away. So having governance that's built into the business practices is a key. So without a seat, 3 legs of a stool are useless. The 7th is you have to meet them where they are. Every company has a different strategy. When I first started talking about the LCA, there was a lot of compliance. You meet legal requirements at the manufacturing site or at the product, product safety. But then customers started asking for information. The Coca-Cola asking information from their beverage providers, container providers. So there was market driven, and then there's going a little bit further, engaged, where you're really engaging the whole value chain and stakeholders to identify opportunities. And then the fourth category here is shaping the future. How do you develop the products and services for the market, you know, in the next generation, or the next century kind of thing? And so this becomes very critical, because you're talking to somebody who's only interested in complying with the legal requirements. They probably aren't going to be very interested in LCA, or may not even if you did it, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And if you get somebody like at the Shaping the Future, you know, companies like Unilever and stuff like that sort of fall into that. You know, they use LCA, and BSF and Johnson & Johnson use it to really drive the new products and services of the future. So you really have to meet them where they are, is the seventh golden rule. The eighth golden rule, which is the one that I find recently, and Barb and I have been, you know, some of the rapid prototype and rebranding projects we've been doing, seem to me is one of the most critical, you know, in terms of explaining why LCA can be used, results can be used, and why sometimes it can't. You start out on the lower left-hand side here. Your ESG or LCA information comes out of your results and your study. But unless that results are implemented and there's changes that are made, and you can, after changes, you can measure and then improve, you don't really get anything. And ultimately what you want out of the LCA results is actually coming over and where you grow your business value, you grow revenue, enhance brand, mitigate risk, reduce cost, and you have a positive sustainability impact, for example, low embodied carbon. So ultimately the LCA results here on the left, on the lower left, what you want for using the results, you have business value and positive sustainability impact. But you don't get business value and positive sustainability impact right when you finish the study. You've got all these changes and all these activities, and often what happens, and this is what, you know, Barb had indicated, the applications need to be lead, you know, not follow the way it was laid out in the original ISO standards, is that you got markets and you've got stakeholder engagement and R&D and strategy are really some of the applications. So when you want to have an LCA, you want folks representing innovation or R&D to be a part of your goal and scope, so that they understand how the results look and how they might be used. And then you and the LCA community understand the language and the terminology that the folks in the user community and the application area, you know, use, so you can begin to translate and connect those two together. But ultimately, there's a time element that until you get the changes and you measure and improve, then you get the business value and positive sustainability. One of the things that, another point here, we added this at the top, systematic interpretation. In LCA, we have interpretation, and LCA in sort of the phrase, the fourth element of the LCA was more of a study-specific interpretation. But this rapid prototyping work that Barb and others and I are working on, there really needs to be, we call it systematic interpretation, which is basically taking the results of LCA and interpreting it in context of your business practice, like innovation or strategy or marketing kind of thing. So this is another element of sort of the interpretation. You got study specific, which really comes down here, but then your systematic interpretation, which allows you to actually create the business value and positive sustainability impacts. This one is Golden Rule 9. It's all about actions, changing behavior, and business practice. You know, as we talked about earlier, you got to have it embedded into the company. To get change, you need vision, skills, incentives, resources, you know, and an action plan. And as a result, if you don't have vision, you get confusion. If you don't have skills, you get anxiety. If you don't have incentives, you get gradual change. If you don't have resources, you get frustrations, you know, and if you don't have an action plan, you get false starts. And so when you think about that arrow from LCA results through applications to business value, a lot of that is a change management process. And so understanding the change management is really key to a successful application of your LCA results. And finally, there is a growing life cycle community out there. I mean, there are resources in New Zealand, Australia, in Costa Rica, where I am, in Latin America, all over the world. There are resources that are consulting firms, like Barb's and the one that I'm with, and there's many, many other people out there in governments. They're a resource, really access them and use them. One of the positive things that came out of my experience in the LCA world, when I had the privilege to chair some of those earlier LCA meetings at CTAC, and then chaired the U.S. delegation to the ISO for the first series of LCA standards, was that we built a global community. And so the fact that I have a privilege an honor to speak to you all this afternoon from Costa Rica, and you're in New Zealand, is just wonderful. I mean, I never would have thought I would have been able to do that. So there's a world community, and what's great about it, we talk and we share, and we hopefully soon will be able to travel and visit and continue to collaborate. So 10 golden rules. There's a paper we have published, and I'll show you. I'll give that to Barb, and it's an open source, so you can have it. It has these and it has examples in it. But I think I'd like to close with just this statement. I said, we need to work together, but how can we really create business value and help address societal issues through the increased demand for and use of life cycle, information? And we can't do it. I can't do it from Costa Rica. We got to do it together. We got to engage the entire value chain. But the important thing is, let's do it now together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was, every time again, I'll find something new in your 10 golden rules. So that's really, really inspiring. I really like the focus of let's do it now and let's do it together. Because as I said before, LCA has been around in this form for 30 years, first form for 50 years, but it is now that we actually need to use it. We do have a couple of questions for you. One is from Peter, and he says, if you have a really big product portfolio, how do you pick the first product? Where do you start?
The way we've approached it with other companies is there's two general directions. One is you approach it from more of a hotspot analysis perspective, looking at major market areas and where there are major customer demands to help you prioritize. You also look at it from the context of, knowing some of the social and environmental issues that are hot today or hot in the time frame that you're looking at, and then doing a simple screening, life cycle thinking perspective, red, yellow, stoplight kind of approach to give you some perspective of how you would prioritize the 50,000 products into high priority, medium priority, low priority kind of thing. And so that has worked. The other thing that is done is to incorporate life cycle information, like BSF has done with their product sustainability assessment, where they've characterized all 45,000, I think at one point they had 50,000 products, and they were able to do it using life cycle hotspot analysis, using customer expectations, using regulatory demands. So it was this LCA is essential but not sufficient. So you need to incorporate LCA information, but also this other information, hotspot analysis, prioritization, and then you can go forward and proceed in that way.
Catherine's asking, if LCA is not sufficient, how do we add recyclability? I might just take that very quickly. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and actually another colleague of mine called Jim, has developed a methodology on how to quantify circularity. That's the MCI, the Material Circularity Indicator. And that's a very useful additional indicator that we very often use alongside LCA results to actually address exactly that question. Any specific advice on doing LCAs for buildings, lessons learned, ways to make them more accessible? Any other tips? That's a big topic, and I think we might just dedicate a whole other webinar to that. We actually do have one. We did that in December, and we'll just share the link with you. So there are tools that are very specific to do building LCAs reasonably quickly. Jim, any initial quick thought from you on that?
No, it's just that the building industry is with the Environmental Product Declaration. I mean, that's been foundational, and that's included into a lot of building bids, specifications now. So you're beginning to see that. So and you see it even here in Costa Rica. I mean, it's all over the world where that's being picked up.
Catherine is asking, does the MCI deal with the lifespan of products? I would say it's actually LCA with a functional unit that deals with the lifespan of products, because if you have a very long-lasting product, compare it with the one that only, let's say you've got a product that lasts 10 years and one that lasts only 2. If your functional unit is having the service the product provides for 10 years, you'll have to manufacture the short-lived one 5 times over. So the LCA would actually deal with that using the concept of the functional unit. What method and or tool do you use for doing LCA of an organization to recommend them to become carbon neutral?
Well, there is an organizational LCA ISO standard.
Yeah, there is.
So that's what I would suggest. I mean, effort came out fairly quickly 4 or 5 years ago. Matthias Finkbeiner and a number of other folks really led that effort, and the UN was very active in it. I don't know if there's a tool per se, but there's certainly a methodology on organizational LCA.
Let's take the next question as the last one from Kritika. Any book or resource suggestion for who is starting to learn about LCA and the methodologies involved? Jim, that's a question for us, right? There is a book that is called LCA for Mere Mortals. It's about 20 years old, slightly outdated, but that's one of the other conference calls that I see Jim on every other week. We're just updating that. And I think it'll be called Unraveling the Mystery Behind LCA. So watch this space. It's coming.
Yeah, and there are a number of books from the University of Denmark that are just major detail kinds of things. And then there are, Marianne Kern, a number of books on, life cycle. But I think this one that Barb and I are working on is going to be a nice, good one for a general, understanding and what it is and how it can be used, and really focusing not just on the methodology, but then how it's used from an application, standpoint.
And spoiler alert, you'll have a chapter on the 10 golden rules in that book too. Let's close it here. Thank you so much, Jim, for sharing all your experience with us. A pleasure as always to have you. And we're very much looking forward to seeing you down under, hopefully next time in Australia very soon. And
yes, thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks for everyone for your questions. We'll answer all the other ones directly, and looking forward to seeing you next time.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.